Now, this is a topic of great interest to me, which is honing your advocacy skills. Documentation, letters, meetings, appeals. Sounds kind of dry, but it's really how you put some flesh on your advocacy concerns. I think that if you leave here today and the most important thing you leave with is that documentation is important, I will have been successful. Because if you talk, and nothing is written down, and there are no dates and no expectations, and you don't have any record of the agreements, etc., it didn't happen, right? It didn't happen because people forget. It didn't happen because you have nothing to bring them back to. It's kind of like policy. You say, here's the policy, here's my concern related to that policy. Or the documentation is, here, last September you promised that if this and this happened, we would be able to do this. Maybe it's a special program, it could be an assessment, who knows. But if you didn't write it down, especially if that person has left the school district and you don't have any record of it, you're toast, right? So getting it in writing is really important. Written information packs a big, powerful punch. Words are kind of go. And if, for me, I often don't remember exactly what the person said. So that's also a problem. So I always suggest using a binder to manage your child's documents. So when you go to a meeting, you're organized, right? They've got these really flashy binders now that they didn't have when Adam was a child, which is where you can put a picture in the front cover. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's one out for Axe binder. So a nice big picture of your child, maybe with his friends, maybe with his siblings, maybe with his family. Because when you're in a meeting, this is who we're talking about. This is a human being, and he's my child, or she's my child. So a current photo is great. Keep it updated. Some samples of your child's work where they're really good, like in my case, Adam is a great artist, so always having some of his art really reaches people. Have dividers in that, and you have, here's the last year's IEP, the IEP reports or updates for the last year or so. Here are some of the behavior issues, incident reports, Here are, what else would I put in there? Just things that maybe the diagnosis, maybe a recent reading assessment, whatever. So you've got your things organized. Very soon as a parent, you will realize that that binder is not going to put all the vital documents you have. So then you're into moving the binder into a filing cabinet situation. And there's a great part in the Autism Manual for BC in Chapter 2, setting up a treatment team. Dr. Jill Calder, who is the origin of the it like itless theory of support, does a very nice job of talking about documentation. And it's because, she's a rehab doctor as well as having a son with autism. So she talks a bit about how you can organize your documents so that if someone says to you, oh no, we decided that last year and it didn't work, you can actually go back and say, we didn't actually decide that. We said that we would do da-da-da-da, and we didn't do it, or that assessment wasn't done. You are, they have 30 kids if it's one classroom teacher, or they have 600 kids if it's a principal. It's not that they're setting out to make you crazy, although sometimes it does feel like that. It's that your job is to keep them front and center on what they've committed to do. And that's part of one's role. So what documents do you keep? Old does not mean out of date or unimportant. So any assessments, you need to keep those and keep them in date order. Keep written communication. So the emails from the school, create a folder on your inbox, and just put all the email correspondence, because you don't know what's going to be important or not. And I always find that keeping a notebook or keeping notes when you're talking to someone on the phone, having a little notebook where you write things down. Now we don't do this as much because we were emailing more, but who did you talk to? So for example, someone's agreed that they'll have something done by such and such a time, but you're calling the Ministry for Children and Families, and there's like, every time the phone's answered, it's somebody else. So ask the name of the person, make a note of the date you called them, the time you spoke to them, and their name, and what they said, right? Because that's a way of following up. Because if it didn't happen, and you want to raise a concern or even a complaint, if you don't know what day you talked to them and you don't know who you talked to, it's hard to advocate, right? So those are things that are really important. And they take self-discipline. Now, keep in mind, all of the things I'm telling you, I don't do them all the time, okay? I often make critical errors in these things, but I'm telling you, ideally, what you should aim for. So you're going to keep all these formal evaluations, assessments, medical reports. You're going to keep report cards, individualized education plans. You're going to keep notes received about your child's behavior, emails, and all the letters that you've written, advocacy letters that you've written, and any work samples that are significant. The communication book that goes back and forth every day, hopefully, do a photocopy of it and keep it, because you might want to go back and look. So for example, you start realizing that every Friday is a really difficult day. What is it about Fridays? And you can go back, and this is worst case scenario, it's because gym is on Fridays, and it's the hell that is gym, because your child really hates the noisiness in the classroom. Or maybe it's that you don't realize that he's outgrown his gym shoes, and when he puts them on, they're really painful, because he's not going to tell you that they're too small, right? Or is it that there's one particular person who works with him on Fridays, and they're just not a good match, right? So this is where you're kind of a detective. And to have those notes to go back and forth and think about them is useful. So making a plan, step B. Review the situation requiring advocacy. And this is a really important point. Pick your battles. As a parent who has a child with special needs, there's many issues that you face, and that you need to sort of decide which are the important ones. If you're always engaged in if everything is of the same value and importance, it's going to be very hard for the people who deal with you to understand what is the most crucial, what is the most important, right? So there are things that are kind of like, we really like this to happen, and there are things that absolutely must happen, right? So if you're fighting two battles on the must front, you may not want to take on 4 more on the we'd really like this front, right? Because it should be, because resources, their time are restricted, so think about what's important to you. Before you start getting really upset about something, say for example, someone has told you something's happened at school and you are really angry. Check the facts. I speak again from experience. Think about where you're getting the information from, and see if there's someone else you can talk to about it. So-and-so brought this up. Maybe his sister came home and said the teacher smacked him. This is very unlikely. So rather than going to the classroom and, saying to the teacher, how dare you do that? You need to find out, well, who else was there? What actually happened? Oh, she didn't actually smack him. She went out the door, tripped, and fell into him, right? Now, for a child with autism, by the way, that can often translate to the teacher, knocked me to the ground, right? And that's it. The teacher did knock me to the ground. That's true. It happened, right? But instead of going in and assuming that that is fact, you also have to find out what actually happened. And I say this again through lots of experience with lots of kids and lots of families who've called me very upset. Just to check your facts first, because again, you don't want to burn bridges with someone who you've got a good relationship with, or you have another important thing to do. You want to be really, you want to be on strong grounds before you take on something like that, because it's very embarrassing to apologize. I've done a lot of it. It's still embarrassing. So defining the issues, listing the facts, setting the goals, set priorities, again, what's critical and what maybe is not so important, reviewing the list, thinking about those must-haves, determining your bottom line, what is really something that you're prepared to go all the way to the Ministry of Education about, and what is not really that significant. So who are you going to talk to about this? Remember I said starting with the classroom teacher, principal, going to the school district. Who do you talk to in the school district? And then, hopefully 95% of the time, issues will be resolved at that level. It's quite rare for them to need to go further. Sometimes it's just a question, and often actually, it's just a question of the parent articulating clearly what the concern is, because people didn't really understand. And often it is the teacher in the moment has made a decision, or the resource teacher has made a decision without having had time to think about it. And the principal, in a discussion with the resource teacher or the classroom teacher, can come up with something else if you bring it to their attention politely, right? So remember, never using a cannon when a pea shooter will do. So important, right? So important, because there'll be times when you're going to have to get out that cannon. And if you get it out every week, it loses its... It becomes a pea shooter. This mother's always complaining. This father's always outraged, right? But if the parent who is reasonable, concise, thoughtful, who is respectful of their time, writes brief letters, doesn't corner them every recess or every lunchtime or after school as they're on their way to pick up their kids, they're going to be listened to. That's just human nature, right? And these are human beings. So executing the plan, keep your eye on the prize. I always recommend that you take someone with you to meetings to take notes and to debrief. Because when we talk about our kids, we get very emotional, right? And sometimes, quite often, we start crying, and we don't like it, but we do it. As parents, it's embarrassing, but actually it speaks to how important this is to us and how vulnerable we feel. To have another adult there to take notes, and who you can debrief with afterwards is really helpful. Because you can say, I can't remember anything I said, and I can't remember anything they said because I was so upset. So if you have someone you can talk, it's great if it's a spouse who can play that role, but a good friend, you don't necessarily expect them to speak, right? They can just take notes and be there to talk to. And the dynamic does change when there is another person with the parent in the room. I don't know why, but it is better to have someone with you. And if English isn't your first language, it's also good to have someone there who could help you afterwards kind of fine-tune the translation, right? So the school district will often provide a translator, and they should, but if you also have someone who can come with you, who understands the language, because sometimes the translators may not get the nuance that you want to get across. So if the answer is yes, you've made a great, you've put together a very good plan, and the administrator has said, yes, we can do that, no problem. I would suggest writing a letter thanking them and restating what they've agreed to. Because again, if it's not in writing, it hadn't happened. And they might not have time to write that letter, to put it in, to document it, but you could. And this documents the decision. Unless they respond in writing contradicting what you understand to be, and unless they write back and say, no, actually, that's not what I said, then that's pretty good, right? You have a documented decision. And you have some grounds to be confident. And you've been upfront, and you've been proactive. So what more could anyone ask for? When the response is no, which happens quite often, you need to rethink your goal. Don't just give up. So if the classroom teacher, the principal says no, well, that's difficult. They might be saying no because they don't have the power to make that decision. Then you can have that, kind of off-the-cuff conversation with them about what should I do next. If the relationship isn't that good, that you're not going to get any help there, then you may have to go up the ladder in terms of going to the school district and asking for their effort. This effectively you're going to the supervisor of the person who said no. And sometimes the supervisor would love you to go, the person who said no would love you to go to their supervisor. Don't assume that they're going to be upset with you. Don't assume that they think the decision that they've had to make is the one that they want to make, right? So again, you're carefully trying to understand, and you can ask questions. And it's much better if you don't do this in an atmosphere of hostility and accusation, right?